nothing my holiness cannot do. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. My wholeness, my sacredness, my connection with God and all that He created is my holiness. And there's nothing that my connection with God cannot do. Isn't that nice to think about? Well, I'm Forgiveness Willie, teaching forgiveness from the Ozarks, or miracles from the Ozarks, because forgiveness leads to the natural result of it is the miracle. A new way of seeing, something that you could not have believed could happen, and then it happened. Because He who controls time and space is our Creator. Okay, well let's look at lesson 38. We're reading from the Foundation for Inner Peace version this year of A Course in Miracles, and this is for lesson 38 on Friday, February the 7th of 2025. And I'm a few days earlier. It's Monday for me, or Tuesday for me. There's nothing my holiness cannot do. Your holiness reverses all the laws of the world. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. Your wholeness or your holiness reverses all the laws of the world. This is A Course in Miracles. He's given us some things that we need to know in order to be miracle workers. Your holiness reverses all the laws of the world. It is beyond every restriction of time, space, distance, and limits of any kind. Your holiness is totally unlimited in its power because it establishes you as a son of God, at one with the mind of His Creator. Through your holiness, the power of God is made manifest. Through your holiness, the power of God is made available. And there is nothing the power of God cannot do. Your holiness, then, can remove all pain, can end all sorrow, and can solve all problems. It can do so in connection with yourself and with anyone else. It is equal in its power to help anyone, because it is equal in its power to save anyone. If you are holy, so is everything God created. You are holy because all things He created are holy, and all things He created are holy because you are. In today's exercises, we will apply the power of your holiness to all problems, difficulties, or suffering in any form that you happen to think of in yourself or in someone else. We will make no distinctions, because there are no distinctions. No distinction between me and my neighbor, my brother, my sister. Look, see what he says? In today's exercises, we will apply the power of your holiness to all problems, difficulties, or sufferings in any form that you happen to think of in yourself or in someone else. We will make no distinctions between ourselves and someone else, because there are no distinctions. When you love your neighbor as yourself, you are loving yourself when you're loving your neighbor as yourself. There's just one self. That's why Yogananda called the path self-realization. Paragraph 4. In the 4 longer practice periods, each preferably to last a full 5 minutes, repeat the idea for today, close your eyes, and then search your mind for any sense of loss or unhappiness of any kind as you see it. Try to make as little distinction as possible between a situation that is difficult for you and one that is difficult for someone else. Identify the situation specifically and also the name of the person concerned. Use this form in applying the idea for today. And he's going to give us a couple different forms here. In the situation involving blank, in which I see myself, there is nothing that my holiness cannot do. In the situation involving blank, in which blank sees him or herself, there is nothing my holiness cannot do. And I might just say, a year ago, I'm giving you an update. A year ago, we were having trouble with the fleas. You all that have dogs and cats know what I'm talking about. It's difficult, and we were looking for some kind of flea repellent that was natural, and they weren't seeming to work. And Jessica was really wanting to get something that just took care of the fleas because it was really bothering her a lot. And so she was wanting to go the pharmaceutical route, which I didn't want to do. I wanted to keep things natural. And I did some research, but we were having a lively conversation about it. And you know what? We ended up finding an answer, and we ended up not having a problem the rest of the year. We corrected it with something that helped immediately from the vet. But one time of that, and then I started using the natural, and I was able to keep them taken care of. That was early in the spring, all summer, which is when they really get strong. Summer and fall had no problem. Anyway, I count that as that in this situation involving flea repellent, in which I see myself, there's nothing that my holiness cannot do. In the situation involving flea repellent in which Jessica sees herself, there's nothing my holiness cannot do. So I'm here a year later saying, I think we found a solution. We've got I left it on one of, I think it was last year's, I put the list of herbs that you can mix in olive oil that will keep them at bay. Don't think it'll kill them necessarily, but it keeps them off of them, and that's all that really matters. From time to time, you may want to vary. But anyway, I've got a little sidetrack there. You just want to be able to bring everything that's causing you any discomfort in any way, whether it's relationship-wise, whether it's it'll always be some kind of a relationship as far as that goes, but because that's where God's at, is in a relationship. But it could be something just as obvious as, God, what do I use to keep the fleas away? So, but whatever your personal difficulties are, that's what we want to bring up in these situations. In the situation involving blank, in which I see myself, there is nothing my holiness cannot do. In the situation involving blank, in which blank, a person, sees him or herself, there's nothing my holiness cannot do. From time to time, you may want to vary this procedure and add some relevant thoughts of your own. You might like, for example, to include thoughts such as, there is nothing my holiness cannot do, because the power of God lies in it, because I'm whole and one with everything, and God included. Introduce whatever variations appeal to you, but keep the exercise focused on the theme. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. There's nothing my holiness cannot do. The purpose of today's exercises is to begin to instill in you a sense that you have dominion over all things because of what you are. In the frequent shorter applications, apply the idea in its original form. There's nothing my holiness cannot do, unless a specific problem concerning you or someone else arises or comes to mind. In that event, use the more specific form in applying the idea for today. For instance, if it's something more specific, say in the situation involving blank, in which I see myself, there is nothing my holiness cannot do. Or in the situation involving blank, in which whoever sees him or herself, there's nothing my holiness cannot do. We're going to try to see ourselves as a whole, as a one. Our wholeness, our holiness, our connection with everyone and everybody. Everything and everybody. Okay, let's go look in our text reading. I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. And let's look we're in chapter 5, section 5, Roman numeral 5. Section 5 is, or chapter 5, healing and wholeness. Good chapter for our lesson today. The ego's use of guilt. Okay, so perhaps some of our concepts will become clearer and more personally meaningful if the ego's use of guilt is clarified. The ego has a purpose just as the Holy Spirit has. The ego's purpose is fear, because only the fearful can be egotistic. The ego's logic is as impeccable as that of the Holy Spirit because your mind has the means at its disposal to side with heaven or earth as it elects. But again, remember that both are in you. Paragraph 2. In heaven there is no guilt because the kingdom is attained through the at-one-ment or the atonement, which releases you to create. Okay, so in heaven there is no guilt because the kingdom is attained through the atonement, which is the relinquishment of guilt, the practice of forgiveness, which releases you to create. The word create is appropriate here because once what you have made is undone by the Holy Spirit, the blessed residue is restored and therefore continues in creation. That little nugget of truth that was always there in the dream, the blessed residue. The yin and the yang and the yin. That little speck of black in the white and that little speck of white in the black. What is truly blessed is incapable of giving rise to guilt and must give rise to joy. This makes it invulnerable to the ego because its peace is unassailable. It is invulnerable to disruption because it is whole. Guilt is always disruptive. Anything that engenders fear is divisive because it obeys the law of division. If the ego is the symbol of the separation, it is also the symbol of guilt. Guilt is more than merely not of God. It is the symbol of attack on God. This is a totally meaningless concept except to the ego. But do not underestimate the power of the ego's belief in it. This is the belief from which all guilt really stems. 3. The ego is the part of the mind that believes in division, doesn't believe in wholeness, doesn't believe in holiness. How could part of God detach itself without believing it is attacking Him? We spoke before of the authority problem as based on the concept of usurping God's power. The ego believes that this is what you did because it believes that it is you. If you identify with the ego, you must perceive yourself as guilty. Whenever you respond to your ego, you will experience guilt and you will fear punishment. The ego is quite literally a fearful thought. The ego is quite literally a fearful thought. However ridiculous the idea of attacking God may be to the sane mind, never forget that the ego is not sane. It represents a delusional system and speaks for it. Listening to the ego's voice means that you believe it is possible to attack God and that a part of Him has been torn away by you. Fear of retaliation from without follows because the severity of the guilt is so acute that it must be projected. Paragraph 4. Whatever you accept into your mind has reality for you. It is your acceptance of it that makes it real. If you enthrone the ego in your mind, your allowing it to enter makes it your reality. This is because the mind is capable of creating reality or making illusions. I said before that you must learn to think with God. To think with Him is to think like Him. That's what we're trying to do today, to see our brothers and sisters almost the same way we see ourselves. To think with God is to think like Him. This engenders joy, not guilt, because it is natural. Our natural state is joy, not guilt. Guilt is a sure sign that your thinking is unnatural. Remember that next time you feel some guilt. Think, well, I'm really turned around because I'm thinking unnaturally. Unnatural thinking will always be attended with guilt because it is the belief in sin, which is an unnatural idea. The ego does not perceive sin as a lack of love, but as a positive act of assault. This is necessary to the ego's survival because as soon as you regard sin as a lack, you will automatically attempt to remedy the situation. So the ego doesn't want you to see sin as a lack of love, a lack of anything, because you'll try to remedy the situation. And look what he says, and you will succeed. The ego regards this as doom, but you must learn to regard it as freedom. to see that sin is lack of love. It's just a lack. You just forgot something. You need to go back to your natural way of being joyful and see your wholeness so that you can be. Paragraph 5. The guiltless mind cannot suffer. Being sane, the mind heals the body because it has been healed. The sane mind cannot conceive of illness because it cannot conceive of attacking anyone or anything. I said before that illness is a form of magic. It might be better to say that it is a form of magical solution. The ego believes that by punishing itself it will mitigate the punishment of God. Yet even in this it is arrogant. It attributes to God a punishing intent, and then takes this intent as its own prerogative. It tries to usurp all the functions of God as it perceives them, because it recognizes that only total allegiance can be trusted. And I thought back in the first part of that paragraph 5, I liked where it said the guiltless mind cannot suffer. Being sane, the mind heals the body because it has been healed. There's a statement of how that true healing takes place. You heal the mind, and then the trickle-down effect of the mind being healed is the body works naturally, and it becomes healed. Paragraph 6. The ego cannot oppose the laws of God any more than you can, but it can interpret them according to what it wants, just as you can. That is why the question, what do you want, must be answered. Of course, you're always going to want happiness and joy. You are answering it every minute and every second, and each moment of decision is a judgment that is anything but ineffectual. Its effects will follow automatically until the decision is changed. Remember, though, that the alternatives themselves are unalterable. The Holy Spirit, like the ego, is a decision. And that's why we're trying to make the decision today that there is nothing my holiness cannot do. The Holy Spirit, like the ego, is a decision. Let's side with truth, with joy, with peace, with wholeness, with holiness. Together, the Holy Spirit, like the ego, is a decision. Together, they constitute all the alternatives the mind can accept and obey. The Holy Spirit and the ego are the only choices open to you. God created one, and so you cannot eradicate it. You made the other, and so you can eradicate it. Only what God creates is irreversible and unchangeable. What you made can always be changed, because when you do not think like God, you're not really thinking at all. Delusional ideas are not real thoughts, although you can believe in them and you can think that they're real, but you are wrong. The function of thought comes from God and is in God. As part of His thought, you cannot think apart from Him. Well, you're a thought of God. Everything else is a blank. Paragraph 7. Irrational thought is disordered thought. God Himself orders your thoughts because your thought was created by Him. Guilt feelings are always a sign that you do not know this. They also show that you believe you can think apart from God and want to. Every disordered thought is attended by guilt at its inception and maintained by guilt in its continuance. Guilt is inescapable by those who believe they order their own thoughts and must therefore obey their dictates. This makes them feel responsible for their errors without recognizing that by accepting this responsibility, they are acting irresponsibly. It is the sole responsibility of the miracle worker to accept the atonement or the atonement for himself, and I assure you that it is. Let's read that again. If the sole responsibility of the miracle worker is to accept the atonement for himself, and I assure you that it is, then the responsibility for what is atoned for cannot be yours. The dilemma cannot be resolved except by accepting the solution of undoing. You would be responsible for the effects of all your wrong thinking if it could not be undone. The purpose of the at-one-ment or the atonement is to save the past in purified form only. Isn't that nice? The blessed residue, the purified things, the love that was always there in the little bit of yin that's in the yang, the little bit of yang that's in the yin, the love that's always there, that's the blessed residue. The purpose of the atonement is to save the past in purified form only. If you accept the remedy for disordered thought, a remedy whose efficacy is beyond doubt, how can its symptoms remain? And then the last paragraph, 8. The continuing decision to remain separated is the only possible reason for continuing guilt feelings. We've said this before, but did not emphasize the destructive results of the decision. Any decision of the mind will affect both behavior and experience. What you want, you expect. This is not delusional. Your mind does make your future, and it will turn it back to full creation at any minute if it accepts the atonement first. It will also return to full creation the instant it has done so. Accept the atonement. Having given up its disordered thoughts of division and accepting your wholeness, having given up disordered thought, the proper ordering of thought becomes quite apparent. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. Yep, that's natural. Okay, well, before we close with our song, let's look and see what's going on around the world. It's St. Mel's Day. Mel of Ardagh, I think, Ardag. It's an Irish Catholic celebration. St. Mel, I thought it was a woman. I've got a daughter, Melody, and I call her Mel sometimes. But it was St. Patrick's nephew who helped him to spread the message of the Christ in Ireland. I think it's kind of goes along with Imbolc. Anyway, this whole season is Imbolc. Ballet Day, Give Kids a Smile Day. We ought to be doing that all the time. We ought to be like little children, according to Jesus. Hug an Addict or Hug an Alcoholic Day. Give somebody a little smile, a little help. Periodic Table Day, and we should all learn everything we can about the scientific method, because what we're learning can be proven reasonably. This is not something you have to take on faith, even though you might have to initially believe that there's a guide, but you get to prove it. Prove it by your practice. That's what we're doing. So anyway, periodic table makes me think about scientific method. And that should be the universal language that we can all reach each other with. It's like, let's just prove what we're talking about. Women's Heart Day, a.k.a. Wear Red Day. I got a little red here. Women's Heart Day. Wave all your fingers as a friend day. I don't know what that. Rose Day, the Rosa genus. There's 100 species of roses. I guess it's because it's coming up a week from Valentine's Day, I expect. So, Rose Day, start getting your roses ready. Send a card to Friend Day, and Working Naked Day. Probably do that either, in a safe place where you don't end up in jail. But it is nice to get a lot of sunshine. A little cool this time of year, though. And out of edible landscaping, there's the Reka Northern High Bush Blueberry, the Reka Northern High Bush Blueberry, the Vaccinium coriambosum. Reka is a very early, large, delicious high bush blueberry introduced from New Zealand. It is adaptable to different soil types, adapts much better than Duke blueberry that ripens at the same time. Leaves are burgundy red in the fall, 4 to 6 feet height, spaced 5 foot apart in rows, 5-foot circles, zones 4 through 7. Works good as a landscape plant. because of the color foliage. And I have I have a near-death experience from NDE Journals on YouTube. It's 15 minutes and 14 seconds. A woman named Anastasia Wesselink Mullering. Anastasia has a website, thehealingheart.com. I'll put all this in the description. It's titled, "She Understood There Is No Good or Bad During Her Near-Death Experience." And I so liked what happened to her. She was having a major dental work done, and they put her under, and she ended up popping out of her body. She probably died for a few moments, for a few minutes. But anyway, she had this most amazing experience. It's only 15 minutes, well worth listening to. And Anastasia said the very first thing that was so life transforming is that she was all of a sudden up on the ceiling looking down at her body. And she thought, hold it just a minute. I'm still conscious. That's not me down there. She said, I'm not a body. And of course, that's what we've been learning, huh? I'm not a body, I am free, for I am still as God created me. That'll be one of our lessons we'll get to. Okay, well, let's see. We'll add. Let's practice a little. Get you started on your 4 or 5 minute practice periods, and then using it throughout the day as needed. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. In the situation involving flea repellent, in which I see myself, there is nothing my holiness cannot do. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. In the situation involving flea repellent, in which Jessica sees herself, there is nothing my holiness cannot do. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. Now you pick your own. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. Pick a situation. In the situation involving, you fill in the blank, in which I see myself. Let's do another one. In the situation involving, in which I see myself, there is nothing my holiness cannot do. Now let's pick somebody else. In the situation involving, in which sees him or herself, in the situation involving, in which sees him or herself, there is nothing my holiness cannot do. There is nothing my holiness cannot do, because the power of God lies in it. There is nothing my holiness cannot do, because I'm one with the power of creation. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. And our word for peace today, we'll take it from Wales, the Welsh people, and it's Heth. Heth be with you. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. 4 times for 5 minutes, as well as throughout the day. Say it as often as needed. There is nothing my holiness cannot do. Heth.